Okay, so the opening scene of the Republic, even just that very brief first paragraph, is very revealing in a lot of ways. Okay, it starts Socrates, who we talked about in the last lecture, is narrating this to somebody. He's telling people what's going on. He's going to recite this entire conversation. You might think just participating in this conversation would take a while. It's an impressive feat. Now Socrates is going to recount the entire thing for whatever reason. Maybe he wants to fix it in his mind. Sometimes you repeat something if you want to remember it, or maybe he wants to tell this to somebody, or maybe he wants to tell lots of people. But in any case, Socrates is narrating the dialogue, and what it starts out, and he and Glaucon, who is actually Plato's brother, also Adiamantus' brother, so Glaucon and Adiamantus are characters who will appear in the Republic. Plato does not. But Glaucon is young at this point, so he's a young man, kind of promising from a very powerful, wealthy Athenian family, somewhat aristocratic family, and young, impressionable, open-minded. And so Socrates and he go down to a place called the Piraeus, and that was basically the port area of Athens, as the note in your translation explains. I mean, ideally you will get the assigned translation. I'm not going to require you to send me a receipt or anything, but it's probably the best translation. It has good notes and even an interpretive essay if you're so inclined to read that. But so it starts, and they go to the Piraeus, and that's kind of the port area of Athens. I mean, Athens was a naval power. They were it was a city on the ocean, but the Piraeus was the particular port area of Athens. And of course, you can think of, well, what do port areas of cities tend to be like? Of course, not necessarily a lot of churches. I mean, I was not shocking anybody if I say that, you know, when people have been on a boat for 6 months, when they get off for the first time, they usually, the first thing they want to do is not go to church. So there's sort of, you know, morally it's a lot looser. It's a lot of things going on down in a port that you may not find in the most respectable parts of town. Also, of course, a lot of foreigners. It's much more cosmopolitan. Socrates and Glaucon have gone there to see this new goddess being worshipped, this new religious ceremony that's being introduced into Athens. So it's a place of innovation, of cosmopolitanism, and it's sort of it's a much more wide open place morally, but also in terms of the types of people that you'll meet, the types of things that go on. And Socrates and Glaucon want to go back to town, but they're stopped, and they go ahead and they have the whole discussion takes place down there in the Piraeus, largely among foreigners. Now, Glaucon and Adiamantus are both Athenians, and they're the ones who really drive most of the discussion after Book One. But it's significant that Plato situates this very long, very serious discussion of justice in a situation in a part of Athens, not the most respectable, not the most traditionally impressive or again just respectable part of Athens, but in this port area where it's much more again, everything is just sort of wide open morally, intellectually, different types of life, different types of people you meet there. And Plato says, well, that's where if you really want to understand justice, you have to go to that type of place, obviously physically in the dialogue, but you know, the idea mentally. You need to be much more open, you need to be much more prepared for all kinds of things that you wouldn't necessarily see if you stayed within the bounds of what's traditionally respectable. You need to be open to these types of things, able to see them. And again, Socrates goes down, sees their sort of two shows, two processions that he sees, one by the Athenians, by his people. Again, he would have identified as an Athenian. That was really sort of politically who he was an Athenian. And then the other by the Thracians, and Thracians weren't even Greeks. Our word barbarian comes from the Greek word barbaros, which was just somebody who couldn't speak Greek. It meant the same thing. A barbarian was someone who was uncivilized. And among the ancient Greeks, it just came from, they thought people who didn't speak Greek, it sounded like they were just saying bar. And the idea was anybody who doesn't speak Greek, anyone who isn't a Greek basically, is not civilized. And the Thracians, no offense to any Thracians who might be listening to this or watching this, but the Thracians were considered to be the most barbaric or among the most barbaric of them all. And Socrates sees their procession, and his reaction is not to say, oh, of course, ours was better, the Athenians, these were the good ones. Of course, we know how to do it, certainly better than these savage, rotten Thracians. He says they were both equally good, I think. So he's very open-minded, not prejudiced at all, I mean, of course, you could put it in a more negative way, not especially patriotic, not especially loyal to his own city, and so on, but very open-minded and obviously interested in new things. And again, not especially tied to his own way of doing things, his own political identity. And of course, the other maybe somewhat surprising thing about this is, again, the official charges against Socrates: corrupting the youth, not believing in the gods of the city, introducing strange new gods. And how does the Republic begin? Socrates goes down to the Piraeus with a very promising but very impressionable young man, Glaucon, to pray to a foreign goddess. So it seems as if Plato, in a subtle but unmistakable way, is indicating not that, oh yes, this was correct, the Athenians were right to prosecute and kill Socrates, but indicating they weren't crazy. There was something to what they were saying. Socrates was in some ways guilty of what Athens said he was. He wasn't simply, there's not necessarily a perfect harmony between philosophy and the city, between what's good for Socrates and what's good for Athens. So again, kind of an admission that, well, not necessarily great that he was executed, but the charges against him were not ridiculous. The fact is, he did corrupt the youth in some ways. He did influence them in ways that maybe made them less good citizens of Athens. And he didn't really believe in the gods of the city. Whether or not he imported strange new gods or goddesses or daimons, or whether he just didn't believe in anything, again, Plato kind of indicates there was something to these charges. Not necessarily the best way to act on them, executing him, but maybe there was something to the charges, and the people who brought them were not wrong about what Socrates was up to. And so they finish all this, and they want to go back to the city. And a friend of theirs named Polemarchus comes up, or he sends his slave to stop them and hold them. And Socrates kind of wants to keep going, and Glaucon says, well, of course we'll wait. So Socrates kind of wants to move on. Glaucon says they'll wait. And they come up, and Polemarchus says, you should stay here. And Socrates says, well, we don't want to. We want to. And Polemarchus says, look at how many there are of us. There are several of us. There are only 2 of you. So either prove stronger than us, or you have to stay. I mean, jokingly, they're friends. But Polemarchus's joke is, look, I mean, we want you to stay. There's 6 of us, 2 of you. I don't think you can prove stronger than us, so you're going to stay. And Socrates says, isn't there another possibility? Couldn't I persuade you? And Polemarchus says, can you really persuade us if we won't listen? So again, Socrates, the philosopher, the embodiment of reason, and again, in a kind of symbolic, metaphorical way, it's shown right here at the front. People don't listen. Reason is actually quite weak. And one of the themes of the Republic, we won't really get into it in this class, but one of the themes is just how relatively weak reason and philosophy are in politics. And that's kind of indicated right here. The people who don't want to listen are more in number, and therefore more in power than the relatively few, maybe very few philosophers who can reason. But again, in terms of political power, it doesn't help you that much to be able to reason if no one will listen to you. Certainly you can say, well, there are lots of good things for the individual, being able to reason, being able to think clearly, a lot of good for the individual, but in terms of influencing, being able to use that for the good of the city, or just having any kind of political influence, if people don't want to listen to reason, there's really not that much that you can do. And this is, again, indicated in this kind of symbolic way here at the beginning of the Republic. And so they agree to stay. Adimantus says, oh, well, don't you know that there's going to be a race on horseback, and they're going to pass torches and so on? And Socrates says, oh, well, that is novel. So again, Socrates attracted to novelty, attracted to new things, something that he's never seen before. That is interesting. And then Polemarchus says, and there will be young men, and you can talk to them. And again, young people more likely to be open-minded, more likely to listen to Socrates and not just dismiss him, or maybe even worse, get angry at him. So it's sort of, the things that he likes: novelty, seeing new things, and talking to young people. So Adimantus and Polemarchus together managed to convince Socrates to stay. So they go to Polemarchus's house, actually his father's house, Cephalus, and Cephalus was a foreign merchant who had settled in Athens. So again, you're in the Piraeus, and book 1 is basically Socrates conversing with 3 non-Athenians: Cephalus, his son Polemarchus, and Thrasymachus, who was a foreign sophist. So again, book 1, a very sustained and very rigorous discussion of what justice is. And again, it takes place in the Piraeus among these people, none of whom could really qualify as good, certainly not good old-fashioned Athenians. And so so this is how the dialogue is framed, how it's open, and the things that we learn about Socrates, about philosophy, and things like that, just here from this very rich opening scene.